Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I am your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, here to bring you the next in our Falcons training camp preview series, as we are now officially less than a month away from the start of Falcons training camp. Obviously, not a ton of news going on here, so this is the perfect time to sort of take a closer look at the roster, really look deep into these position groups. Today we're going to be covering wide receiver and tight end. So wide receiver in particular, probably the group with arguably the most intrigue of any on the roster. So this is, I think, going to be a pretty fun one. Also 12 guys in that room, so there's a lot to get to. And then we're going to cover tight end today as well, which is somewhat settled at the top, but there's definitely, I think, a wide open opportunity for someone for the fourth tight end spot, basically wide open. And they may even bring in additional players there. So two pretty interesting groups, in my opinion, to cover today as we get deeper into the offense. If you missed the first version of this episode, I'll put a link to it in here. The quarterbacks, running backs, and fullback groups. That one we already covered, so you can go back and check that out. And we'll be getting to the offensive line next time, so stay tuned for that. In terms of other content, we just finished breaking down our season predictions, which of course is way too early to have a meaningful prediction. But hey, you know, it's fun. We broke down the schedule. We broke down what we think the Falcons are going to do. And but all of us all came to the same overall record prediction, but all had a very different way of getting there. So it's a pretty fun series of shows, the last two Falcoholic Lives with Eric Robinson and Anna Ikic, if you guys want to check those out. As always, like I said, almost to training camp. I got some exciting stuff that I'm going to be announcing on the patron Q&A, which is going to be Friday night, June 30th at 6 p.m. If you're interested in taking part in that, you still can. It's patreon.com/Falcoholic If you want to get involved with that, you can sign up there. All tiers right now have access to those sessions. And if you're interested in donating to the training camp travel fund, all donations over the next couple months are going to training camp. You can do that at streamlabs.com/Falcoholic/tip, or you can do it on Twitter. You can go to my Twitter at FalcoholicKevin. There is a Venmo link embedded in the Twitter profile for you if you prefer that. And again, we always appreciate those donations. They really help lessen the burden on me financially getting down there to training camp. I will be there for 7 days this year officially, and I believe Adnan will be there for the other 7 before the first preseason game. So lots to look forward to there. Before we go any further, I do want to bring you a word from our sponsors this month. First of all, today's show is brought to you by betonline.ag, your number one source for all your sports betting needs. You can get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. Maybe, of course, feeling overly confident in the Falcons or feeling overly confident in some other NFL futures bet. You can bet on those right now. You can bet on the Falcons to win the NFC South, perhaps even the NFC Championship before the rest of the league catches up to that hype train. Because after the preseason, if the Falcons look great, those odds are going to shift. But no matter what you decide to do, guys, BetOnline is your sports intel headquarters this season, as they've got you covered for all your insider sports bet wagering needs. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can get right on your phone. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action, and be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. It's written, you know, right there also, BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. And then also have a new sponsor, which I'm sure you guys will enjoy. And this episode is also sponsored by Blue Chew. Guys, know it can be awkward, but let's talk about sex. Remember the days when you were always ready to go? Now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. Listen up, BlueChew.com. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. You can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. The process is simple. Sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part, it's all done online, so no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. Look, guys, Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex. Discover your options at BlueChew.com. Chew it and do it. It's a great line. A+ copy there, guys. Thanks. We've also got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code BUCKET, that's BUCKET, at checkout. Just pay $5 and ship it. Again, that's BlueChew.com, promo code BUCKET to receive your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com, BlueChew.com, not Bluetooth, wow, and for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew once again for sponsoring the podcast. All right, guys, let's dive into the wide receiver group. Like I said, 12 players in this group. And I'm going to break this one down into 3 sort of groupings because there are so many guys in it. The first one, of course, once again, will be roster locks. I have 3 guys in here. Honestly, might only be 2. But to start, first of all, Drake London, Mac Hollins, and Scotty Miller are the 3 guys that I'm considering roster locks. I think these are the 3 established guys that are sort of, I think, have clear roles in the offense and were the sort of bigger signings. And then obviously Drake London is the wide receiver 1. So he's not going anywhere. It's sort of self-explanatory with Drake London, right? Had a very encouraging rookie season. I think he can deliver a lot more going forward with a quarterback who's more competent. The few games that Desmond Ridder and Drake London had together were extremely productive, and London would have been on pace for well over 1,000 yards if Ridder had played the entire season at that pace. So I think there's going to be a lot more volume there for Drake London and a lot more accurate passes than what we were getting from Marcus Mariota. So Drake London, obviously, I think is primed for a breakout year, if you want to call it that, at wide receiver 1. And I think he's going to be a core part of what this offense wants to do through the air. And then there's Mac Hollins, who honestly I think is kind of underrated. Had a pretty good season last year for the Raiders, really his first ever as a featured target. It's kind of a late career renaissance for Hollins, who's always sort of been a functional, serviceable wide receiver 3-4 type of guy, and an elite run blocker. Mac Hollins is one of the best run blocking wide receivers in the NFL. And look, I mean, he's huge. Like, I think he's like 6'4", 220. So this is a big bodied wide receiver, physical, dominating on the outside. And I think he's going to be a core part of the blocking scheme and also the number 2 target at wide receiver. And also likely to be the primary backup for Drake London. So if London, God forbid, has to miss any time, I think Mac Hollins is the guy that's going to step into that role and, can do a lot of the same things that Drake London can. I don't think he's as dynamic. I don't think he's as talented, but he does have the size. He has great contested catchability. So he can give you the similar sort of style that Drake London offers. So you've got that guy in hand. And then the third guy on this list is Scotty Miller, who had a really interesting sort of breakout season in Tampa a couple of years ago, then dealt with injuries and just sort of got buried on that depth chart where the Bucs had, of course, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and they signed Russell Gage to a big deal. So they were basically filling out the chart, and Scotty Miller just didn't get a lot of opportunity to play. This is your Damiere Byrd upgrade, I think. Miller's, I think, 5 years younger than Damiere Byrd. Also a speedster, rumored to run in the 4.2s. I think officially ran in the 4.3s at the combine. Similar size and sort of profile to Damiere Byrd, and that I think he's got a lot of ability as a deep threat. He's also been used sometimes on shorter stuff. And I think he's that more dynamic presence. Obviously not a big guy, but he can play in the slot and outside, so he gives the team some flexibility there. And he has been starting to play special teams. He played a lot of special teams last year for Tampa Bay, so I think he checks that box as well, as he's going to be able to contribute on special teams. Could be a factor in the returner battle as well. We heard that he was getting some opportunity there after Avery Williams' injury. So Miller, I think, has a pretty clear path to the roster. He's the one that I would say maybe he's not a lock per se. Like if these guys that we're going to talk about soon, like if a couple of these guys just absolutely blow up in camp, I don't think that the team would be like, oh, we can't get rid of Scotty Miller, but I think he's sort of the most established deep threat, and I think they definitely want at least one of those guys in this group. So I think Miller's pretty safe, enough that I would consider him, more or less a roster lock. So those are the 3 guys I have in that group. Next, we'll go to the roster competitors, and in that group, I have 5 players, and I'll just go through those real quick, and then we'll sort of break down my thoughts. Kadero Hodge is the top one. Penny Hart, Josh Ali, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and Frank Darby I have in this roster competitors group. And these are guys I think have a 50% chance or so at making the roster. Like they're in that sort of range where, they have a realistic / good chance to make the roster or at least be a primary competitor there. And like, to be completely honest, I haven't had a chance to see any of these guys besides Kadero Hodge and Frank Darby in person. I haven't really watched a lot of Penny Hart, Josh Ali. I mean, I watched J.J. Arcega-Whiteside coming out of college, but that's basically all I know there. But based on what we've heard, and that's all I could go off of based on OTAs and all this stuff, these are the guys I think are the primary competitors for the actual roster. And then I think there's another group of guys that I wouldn't be surprised if some of those guys jump up into this group and some of these guys go down. But this is just my best guess at this point. But yeah, starting out, KhaDarel Hodge, special teams ace. I think he's a completely serviceable wide receiver 5 type of player. He can play outside. He can play in the slot. I think KhaDarel Hodge is pretty safe unless somebody like really blows up and impresses, but he's that key special teams guy, so that whoever does that is going to have to be able to replicate his special teams ability. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to do that, so I think Hodge is the safest of this group. I'm going to be penciling him in as like the wide receiver 4 or 5 on the roster. In all of my roster projections, I'm going to be predicting him to make the roster, but he's not a lock, certainly. So I think he's the safest of this group. Penny Hart, I think, did get a boost after the Avery Williams injury because he does have a lot of experience as a returner. And he can also give the team a little bit more as a slot guy. And I really did like Penny Hart coming out of college. So he definitely has potential. And I think he'll be a serious competitor here. The one that I was really surprised by was Josh Ali, who I've never seen before. Never really knew much about, but he did end up on the Falcons practice squad last year. He was re-signed to a futures contract, and he is like the last man standing from those futures contracts. So, and we've heard that he's been getting actually a fair amount of run, like earlier in the rotation. He's involved in the returner battle. The team seems to actually be pretty high on Josh Ali, so I'm going to be factoring that in to my early predictions as well. I think Josh Ali actually has a pretty good chance. They do seem to really like him. So that one was surprising to me, based on what we've heard so far. I do think he's in this group for sure. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside I'm putting in here because of his draft pedigree. He's clearly really talented. He hasn't put it all together, but he does fit the mold, right? This is a guy that's a big receiver, really willing and good run blocker, physical outside presence, great contested catch player. And he's started to play a lot of special teams in his final year in Philadelphia, which could help him stick on the end of this roster. His potential, I think, lifts him into this group more than some of the other guys. And he's got several years of NFL experience, and maybe he just needs a fresh start like some of these other guys. He needs to prove it. I would not call him like one of the safer guys on this list. I think the top 3 of Hodge, Hart, and Ali are probably the guys that are the favorites to make the roster, but I think Arcega-Whiteside is definitely in that group of guys that deserves the real true roster competitor label. And then I got Frank Darby here. Honestly, guys, I don't really think Frank Darby's going to make it, but the team loves him. I know personality-wise, he's a joy to be around. The team loves him. The players love him. He's just a fun player. I don't think he offers a ton on special teams or offense, but as like a wide receiver 6, I think he offers enough to get that spot. Because of his history here and draft status with the team, I think he's got a leg up on some of the UDFA types and late signings, but I think Frank Darby is the one in the most danger of not making this roster of this group for sure. So I know he has a lot of fans, and I've really enjoyed Frank Darby in Atlanta, so I'm not excited to see him go, but I think he's got the toughest road of any of these 5 guys to make this roster. The next one, calling this one squad competitors, guys that I think are legit, like that are probably fighting for practice squad spots. And I've got the other 4 receivers here. I will preface this by saying I believe one of these guys is probably going to jump up into the roster competitors group. I just have no idea which one it is. My personal guess, I will tell you, but I don't know enough about these guys. They don't really have a long track record in the NFL, enough for me to make any sort of educated guess. I do think all these guys have a legitimate chance for the practice squad, but the roster might be asking a lot. I think these are guys that have like a 25% chance or less of making it. But like I said, one of these guys is probably going to be a factor in the roster battle by the time that the preseason has concluded. So 4 guys in here. Xavier Zay Malone is what they're calling him. He's got a nickname, so Arthur Smith, when he nicknames players like Ryan Newsel, newsflash, those guys, I think, have a tendency to stick around, so pay attention to him. We've also got Kylon Harris. Again, if anybody knows for sure how to pronounce that, let me know. Slade Bolden former Alabama receiver, and Chris Blair, who was the late signing after mandatory minicamp. So these four, I think, are all legitimate receivers. So I think any of these guys could jump up into that next group. The one that I think has the best chance is Xavier Malone, Zay Malone, because I loved his tape. It's a lot of fun. Again, Division II Henderson State, not the level of competition, not there, but Xavier Malone, elite speed, really good ball tracking, deep ball ability, and surprising run after catch and contact balance that I was not expecting to see from a guy that's a smaller receiver like him. And I think that contact balance, I think that translates. Like, obviously, when he's running past everybody at the D2 level, he's just a better athlete. And, he's a great athlete. I think he's still a good athlete at the NFL level. You can't just survive on that at the NFL level, though. We've seen this time and time again. Where I think Xavier Malone has the edge is that his contact balance, like D2 players, this is still college football. These guys can tackle. They can hit. They're not bad players. The athleticism is just not on the level of Division I, but they're good tacklers. And Xavier Malone made a lot of guys look silly. He broke a lot of tackles. Just was able to stay on his feet really well. He's in the returner competition as well. So he's got that ticket where if he wins that returner battle, because of that deep speed, because of that contact balance, he's got a ticket to the roster off of that. So I do think if one of these guys is the most likely to jump up into the roster competitor group, it's probably Xavier Malone. But I do think these other three guys have a shot too. Chris Blair, I know, stuck around, I think, with the Packers, if I'm not mistaken, for a couple of years. And Slade Bolden, I liked his college tape. Keelan Harris also had really good D2 tape. Athletically, I think he's a lot more limited, so I wonder if that'll hold him back. But, this is an intriguing group. I wouldn't be shocked at all if one of these guys ends up jumping into that serious competitor group. My money would be on Zay Malone, but I know all of these guys have fans. I know Slade Bolden has a lot of fans too. So, this is my educated guess that I think most likely these are practice squad type of competitor guys, but I think Zay Malone is the one that I would consider jumping up into the other group and will be the least shocked if he's actually a serious contender in training camp. All right, guys. Next group we're going to take a look at is tight end. This one's not quite as verbose, not as many guys competing here, but this is a very important group for Arthur Smith's Falcons offense. The Falcons routinely rolled out 2 or even 3 tight ends at the highest rate, maybe of any team in the league. They also utilized a lot of running backs. So when I talk about how important having a lot of tight ends is, the Falcons are a team that's really going to make that happen. They will probably keep at least 4. They kept 5 at times last season, partially due to injuries, but I think that they would consider keeping 5 if the right group was here. But again, at least 4 tight ends I'm expecting to be on that 53-man roster. And this is a vital group. Arthur Smith expects these guys to all block and all catch passes. Kyle Pitts, last year was sort of his blocking trial by fire. They really asked him to block a lot, and he did get a lot better. I think he's like an average blocker now, which for a guy that was never really asked to do it in college because of his talent, that's impressive. I think it really shows off Kyle Pitts' work ethic, and I think Kyle Pitts becoming a complete tight end will just unlock even more for him in the receiving game. He doesn't have to come off the field. He can stay out there. He can block. And, teams won't know what he's doing. Like, he's not going to be a decoy as a blocker, which is great for this rushing attack as well. So, speaking of Kyle Pitts, let's get to the roster locks. 3 guys I think I have in this category. Yes, 3 guys. Obviously, Kyle Pitts. We'll talk about him. Then Jonnu Smith behind him, and then Parker Hesse is the third guy that I think these are all safe roster locks. These are all guys that the Falcons either invested a ton in and are like star caliber players, traded for and are paying a lot of money, or are just key components to the offense. Kyle Pitts, look, disappointing season last year. I think it's sort of overblown considering he missed a lot of games due to injury, and Marcus Mariota just could not get him the ball. Like, it was embarrassing. And like, this is coming from a guy who the first 6 games of Marcus Mariota were actually pretty good. The Falcons were at a top 10 offense level at that point. Mariota was hitting a lot of guys, like Olamide Zaccheaus in particular, really effectively, but he just couldn't get the ball to Kyle Pitts, and that's a cardinal sin in this offense when you've invested so much in Kyle Pitts. I don't think it's a Kyle Pitts problem at all. he's streaking downfield wide open and Mariota just can't hit him. I mean, that's not Kyle Pitts' fault. I think Kyle Pitts is still that player. People forget he had 1,000 yards as a rookie. That's only happened twice in NFL history, one time being Kyle Pitts. So he's still great. I think he's going to be a star. I think the Falcons are going to have an elite duo of pass-catching players in Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And I think Desmond Ridder is going to be much more willing and able to get the ball to Kyle Pitts. And that will be one of the keys to this offense, honestly. Can the Falcons hit those deep shots to Kyle Pitts that Marcus Mariota could not last year? And if they can, I think that's going to be really good and really lift this offense in a huge way, and really punish teams for stacking the box, which is really a core component of this offense, right? Marcus Mariota couldn't get it done. It really limited what the Falcons could do offensively. They were still able to get it done on the ground. Falcons were still a great rushing attack, but they need to be able to capitalize when teams stack the box and really load up to stop the run, and they just weren't able to do that last year. Kyle Pitts is a key component of that, obviously safe for the roster. Then we got Jonnu Smith, who I think is one of the most underrated additions this offseason. Jonnu Smith, to be clear, I don't think Jonnu Smith is going to be like a super high volume pass catching target. I don't think this is not, Jonnu Smith's not necessarily that sort of deep threat style guy that I think some people think he is when you look at his like athletic profile. Jonnu Smith is kind of like a receiving focused Parker Hesse, where he lines up in the backfield. He does some fullback stuff. He does some halfback stuff. He does jet sweeps. He does all this stuff. And really where Jonnu Smith made his mark the most for Tennessee was short yardage and red zone. He had 8 touchdowns with Arthur Smith in 2020, was just this red zone secret weapon. And I think that's what he's going to be once again. He's going to give the Falcons that really important piece in the red zone. That's sort of just this secret sauce, because teams know Drake London already a really dangerous red zone threat. Kyle Pitts hasn't been that yet, but he's attracted a ton of attention in the red zone, and that's not going to stop. So when you're dedicating 1 or 2 guys to Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and then you've got Bijan Robinson and this backfield to contend with, and you have to sort of always, especially as you get closer to the goal line, you have to respect the threat of that run. Jonnu Smith's going to have a lot of opportunities one-on-one, probably with linebackers, sometimes maybe even with defensive ends, depending on how heavy the formation gets, to really just use his athleticism and his ability to move around to just create chaos. And I think this people are going to be mad, and it doesn't mean Kyle Pitts isn't going to catch more touchdowns, but I think Jonnu Smith could lead the Falcons in red zone touchdowns this year. And I don't think that would be a bad thing. Will he get 8 again? I don't know. But I do think he's someone that really needs to be get some more respect on his name, because the Patriots did not utilize him the way Arthur Smith did, and I think that was a big mistake on their part, giving him all that money and just letting him go to waste as a traditional tight end. That's just not what he is. And he's a decent blocker too, especially as a move player. Speaking of blockers, Parker Hesse, he's going to be the Falcons' main blocking tight end. And again, like Jonnu Smith, Parker Hesse is a very mobile blocker. He can do inline just fine, but Hesse is that, if Hesse has continued to improve as like a fullback type blocker, this could be where the Falcons look to shed the fullback, go to Parker Hesse and Jonnu Smith as that sort of fullback type players, and utilize that position more as like a playmaker, and use the tight end, and then save a roster spot for another position that they may be wanting to load up on a little bit more, like wide receiver. So I think Hesse is absolutely safe. He does a lot for this team. He played the most snaps, I believe, of any tight end last year. Kyle Pitts got hurt, obviously, but Hesse played more than any wide receiver not named Drake London or Olamide Zaccheaus by far. I think he played over 60% of the offensive snaps. So he's a core component of this offense and should not be forgotten about. So I think all 3 of the other tight ends are in contention for the roster as well. So they're roster competitors. And I do think one of them is the favorite based on my opinion only at this point, but I do think both of these other guys have a shot legitimately. So these 3 guys, John Fitzpatrick, the 7th round pick from 2022, who unfortunately missed they missed the entire season due to injury in training camp. I believe it was a back injury. He's fully healthy. He's been practicing all this offseason. So interesting guy that I think we're going to get the first opportunity to see this year. We also have Felipe Franks, the old standby, who Arthur Smith We know he's obsessed with Felipe Franks, so we'll see if Felipe can continue to hang on or if this is his year that he goes down to the practice squad. And then Tucker Fisk has come back as well, who was in camp last year. Again, this is another Parker Hesse type of guy, sort of a mobile blocker that can do a lot of different things. Also a former defensive line convert to tight end. The Falcons seem to like to do that. It's interesting. So again, I think all three of these guys have a shot. I do think that if they keep just 4, that it's going to be John Fitzpatrick, almost certainly. Again, this is just my gut feeling based off what I've read so far, but I think John Fitzpatrick, he's that blocking type. They need, and how much they're going to run the ball. They have 2 receiving focused guys in Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. They only have 1 real blocker in Parker Hesse. So I think John Fitzpatrick is going to make the roster for his ability to be that primary blocker. He's a really good blocker. He's got almost tackle sort of height, weight, tackle size, right? Lighter to play tight end, but he's a big tight end. And honestly, I thought his hands coming out were really good. He's not a dynamic athlete, but athletic enough to hit all the blocks, has good hands, could potentially be like a red zone outlet type of guy. And look, they drafted this guy for a reason. This was a guy that nobody really knew about going in the draft. I certainly hadn't scouted him, but they liked him a lot. And the Falcons, again, they did not bring back MyCole Pruitt, and they did not go after another blocking tight end or any tight end in the draft in what was a really deep class overall. So I think that communicates a lot of optimism and faith in a guy like John Fitzpatrick to take that next step to make the roster and really bolster the blocking. Felipe Franks, the reason he has a good chance to stick around is because he's that Kyle Pitts sort of backup. Now, Felipe Franks has never been able to turn playing time into anything. Like, he hasn't been able to get stats at all. But he never played tight end before the last couple of years. So that could, this is a thing. Like, if you're going to develop a guy, sometimes it takes time. Maybe this is the year he finally puts it all together, because last camp, if you'll remember, we were very high on Felipe Franks. He was looking great. So if he has another strong camp and this time is able to convert it into good preseason play and then hopefully convert that into good regular season play, I mean, I would not be shocked if Felipe Franks makes it as the 5th tight end again. We also know he could be the emergency quarterback. And I do wonder in some ways if they could label him again as a quarterback, and put him in the quarterback room as the 3rd quarterback and make him that emergency 3rd quarterback on game days, while keeping him on the roster as sort of a backup type guy. Obviously, that would mean he could only come in if there was a quarterback injury. But I do think that Arthur Smith likes him. I get what he's trying to do. He wants a backup for Kyle Pitts that's also a dynamic presence in the receiving game, but he hasn't shown anything yet. This is sort of do or die now. Like, he needs to translate a good training camp into good preseason and into good regular season, or he's not going to stick around much longer. So, and Tucker Fisk, look, I think Fisk, I don't think has a great chance to make the roster this year, but he did make it back. I think he's got an obvious path to the practice squad, and they want a guy that's sort of going to be able to fill that Parker Hesse role if Hesse has to miss time. I think he's sort of being set up and groomed into being this Parker Hesse backup. And practice squad might be sort of where he's at this point, but I do think he's an interesting player, and I think he's got potential. So, we'll see what he can do in camp, but at this point, I do think he's probably ticketed for the practice squad. So we'll see. I also would not rule out another signing here if this group is not coming together as expected or we get an injury. I think MyCole Pruitt's probably on speed dial. I mean, if it was up to me, I would have already brought back MyCole Pruitt, but I think the reason they haven't is they want to give John Fitzpatrick a legitimate chance to win the job, because if MyCole Pruitt was here, I think we all know MyCole Pruitt would probably just win that job. So I think they want to give John Fitzpatrick a legitimate chance to work with the first team as a blocker, to get those reps and see what they have. And if they don't like it or they're not confident enough, that they'll bring back MyCole Pruitt. And MyCole Pruitt might just come back anyway, and they'll keep 5 tight ends. I mean, we'll see. But that's exactly what happened last year, if you'll recall. Like, the Falcons didn't have Pruitt on the roster for a while. Then they bring him in right before camp, and then, the rest is history. So overall, I think this is a good tight end room. And I think Jonnu Smith's really underrated. I think John Fitzpatrick could be a really good blocker, but we'll just have to see. But Not as much intrigue as wide receiver necessarily, but I do think it's a fun group. And I think this is one that maybe it's a little bit underrated in terms of like I'm really excited to see what Jonnu Smith is doing in training camp. Just really, I think that is going to be one of the keys. If this offense beats expectations, especially in the national media expectations, I think it'll be in a large part to Jonnu Smith's sort of reinvigoration here in Atlanta under Arthur Smith, which people should have seen coming, because Arthur Smith knows how to use Jonnu Smith. Those two made magic together in Tennessee. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun to monitor that situation. Guys, that's those positions today. So we got through wide receiver and tight end. Again, I think wide receiver may be the most intriguing position. One of the most fun always to watch at camp. I'll be getting you plenty of videos, plenty of stuff at training camp. Again, if you are interested in donating to help cover the travel expenses, that is streamlabs.com/thefalcoholic/tip. Link is in the show description. Appreciate anything. But again, totally optional, but we do appreciate everything you guys do. Please do like, subscribe if you're enjoying the show. Leave that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And yeah, stay tuned for some more great content coming your way. Like I said, the patron Q&A is going to be Friday, June 30th at 6 p.m. So you're probably listening to this that day or afterwards. But for patrons, that's going to be Friday night. Everyone else will get it Monday morning. And then, yeah, if you want to take part in that, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live. We're going to be forming those patron fantasy leagues very soon. So if you want to get your name in the hat for that, make sure probably by about training camp you want to be in. So, I'm not trying to, force you guys in early or whatever if you don't want to. But to play the fantasy leagues, you do need to be a patron, and you do need to maintain your Patreon status throughout the league, or you're not eligible to win any prizes or anything like that. So those are the rules around that. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll announce more about that after the Q&A session. But yeah, guys, really appreciate everyone for watching, tuning in, hanging out. We'll be back next week with plenty more content and more training camp previews for you guys as we get through the remainder of the offense and inch ever closer to training camp itself. Today's show was brought to you by BetOnline. And yeah, thanks again. I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. The show is Dirty Birds and Brews. You can follow us at Falcoholic Live. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Have a great day, folks.